This is Patrick Russell. I am interviewing Bob Shelato for the first time. This interview is taking place at St. Mary Eglise on June 4th, 2014. This interview is being conducted by the Making History Project for a project named War and Peace, Memories from World War II. Let's continue with the story you're telling me about writing your books. You were telling me earlier that you've written 3 books.
Yes, I did. This was about 20 years ago that I wrote the first book, From Wheat Fields to Battlefields, and the name deriving from the fact that I was brought up in the wheat fields of Indiana. I don't recall why I got the idea of writing a book, but I did, and didn't pay too much attention to it until a reporter heard about it and read it, and then it came out in the newspapers and very quickly sold about 1,000 copies. I soon lost interest in it and lay gathering dust for many years, and my grandchildren have now picked up the project of putting the book on Amazon, which they have done. Since then, I have written a children's book called Fire Dauber, and then more recently, I just finished a book called From Battlefields to Wheat Fields, the opposite of the title of the first one. First one meaning going from the wheat fields of Indiana into battles. The second meaning from coming out of battles and how a soldier copes with coming home and the conditions that they find at that moment.
And what motivated you to write these books?
I don't recall any motivation. I knew that I had had a tremendous amount of experiences, far exceeding the average person, and I guess if I had to have a motivation, it would be that I would like for people to experience some of the things that I experienced.
Well, tell us where you started first of all in the service. What branch?
Well, the government allowed me to graduate in 1943 in June of that month, and immediately then I was drafted into the service. Went to Fort Benjamin Harrison, a suburb of Indianapolis, was then 30 days later transferred to Camp Bowie, Texas, and at that point I underwent training as a combat engineer. An interesting point is that a band met the incoming train, and I thought it was a bit unusual, never found the reason until years later at an Army reunion. An individual told me the reason the band was there because we were being activated into a brand new unit. And whenever they activated a new unit, they brought the band out. And that solved the mystery of why the band was on the platform when I arrived in Camp Bowie in 43.
What were your service dates?
Pardon me?
What were your service dates? So you started the service in 43 and until
in
when?
June of 43, and then I was discharged in early December of 45. So I was in the service about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And I guess that's not too long compared to most service people.
And what type of things did you do in the service?
Well, it's interesting to note that when we arrived at Camp Bowie, being a new unit, they lined everyone up on the parade ground, and then the cadre, the top sergeant, made up of top sergeant and the supply sergeant and cooks and so forth, they stood in the background on this long line of troops, all raw recruits. And they went down the line and they said to this individual, "You're a truck driver." To the next individual, "You're a tool keeper," and so on until they got to me and they looked me in the eye and they said, "You're a weapons sergeant." This did not mean that I was immediately a sergeant, but I would gain the rank of a sergeant if I didn't fulfill my duties as they expected. And that's how I happened to become a weapons sergeant. my duties consisted of overall responsibility for each and every weapon that our company had, and also I was in charge of security. So when the work detail went out to clear a minefield or build a bridge or blow up a bridge, whatever the occasion might be, my job was to see that these boys were protected from the enemy forces.
And so you're saying that it was just the fate of, or the luck of the draw, how you became a...
Just a fate of luck. They pointed a finger and they said, you're a weapons sergeant. And then years later, I come to realize that what a blessing that was. Many individuals, most all individuals, are dedicated to a squad, a platoon, a company, a battalion. I was really not dedicated really to any of those groups. I was considered kind of a loner. They gave me a vehicle and they gave me a driver. And it was my responsibility to see that these weapons were kept clean and provide the security. Beyond that, I had very little supervision. And so this opened the door to many experiences a normal person wouldn't have. If in battle we saw something happening on another side of a hill, I would say to the driver, let's go check it out and see what's going on. Not many people had the opportunity to do those things. So because of that, I had far more experiences than the average individual.
And you were part of the Third Army, correct?
Yes, I was under George S. Patton's in the Third Army.
And what type of weapons were you involved with?
I remember we had a Thompson submachine gun. We had, of course, everyone carried an M1 rifle, and then we had the carbine. We had a 50 caliber. The 50 caliber was usually mounted on top of a ring mount above the passenger seat of the cargo truck, upon which I was usually spent most of my time riding in transit, and various other types, 45 pistol, so on. An interesting thing was that as a weapons sergeant, I had to know every detail of each of these weapons. And part of my testing was that we would not just field strip, which means that large pieces come off of the weapons, but I had to be able to detail strip down to the nuts and bolts of each weapon, and no matter how small or how large, and blindfold them, throw them onto a GI blanket, mix them up, and then be able to put all these weapons back together blindfolded. And this was necessary because you may have darkened conditions when you had to do that. And so that was the extent of my knowledge, part of my knowledge.
Well, that's pretty impressive. So how many weapons do you think that you had to be a master of? Mostly,
we had a 30 caliber air-cooled machine gun. We had a 30 caliber water-cooled machine gun, and then we had the 50 caliber. And those are basically the three units that I was involved with. They were the main backbone of our security around each and every job that we went on. We also had the bazookas. But I saw very little action with the bazookas, but although we did during wartime come up with one time that we had to use that particular weapon.
You mentioned earlier that because of your position, you had a lot more experiences than perhaps other servicemen.
Yes.
Can you elaborate what type of other experiences you had?
Well, one of the most dramatic experiences that I had happened shortly after we landed on Utah Beach, and we put together a few broken bridges and so on, which is kind of routine and monotonous. But then one day we were assigned a job of cleaning a highway off with mines, and I happened to be in the rear of the work detail. And I heard a motor in back of me, and I turned, and there were three Jeeps. And in the center Jeep was General George S. Patton. I knew this even from a distance because I could see the stars on the bumper. he always had his stars printed on the bumper, and I knew that's who it was. And as I looked up, he motioned me forward, and I came to his Jeep. And he was interested in knowing how far we had been looking for mines. And then he asked a question, have you found any mines? And I was giving negative answers, no, sir, no, sir. And then he asked a question that jokingly I can then say to my friends that the famous General George S. Patton came to me for advice. And this is how that happened. I found it quite humorous. The third question that he asked, he said to me, "Soldier, what do you think about up above, beyond this point?" And to me, that was he was asking advice. So I jokingly say, this guy came to me for advice. And my answer was very short and sweet and simple. No, none, sir. I don't know. I have no idea. And with that, he had a swagger stick, and he motioned forward, and all three Jeeps took off at top speed. He had a major for a machine gunner in his Jeep, and two other lesser officers in the Jeep in front and in the back, and they had 30 calibers, and the major in Patton's Jeep had a 50 caliber machine gun. But the interesting thing about that was that after he left and went over the road that was not clear of mines, the Jeeps jumped the highway, crossed the ditch, and sped up the backside of a long hill cow pasture. But up on top of the hill was an American observation post, and you could see puffs of smoke above that where an LS-5 was dodging bursts of artillery that the Germans were trying to knock this plane out of the air. And occasionally shell bursts were on top of the hill. And he stopped the backside of the hill with these three Jeeps. Three men from a distance we could watch and see. They bent over and they rushed up to the backside of the hill, flopped down on top of the hill where along with the American observer was. And he watched the front lines for a good 20 minutes. And then they all three mounted Jeeps again, and zoom, 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 they were disappeared and were gone. And about 3 days later, there was a tremendous drive. American tanks come up that same road, and it was a big drive and quite a large advance. So Patton was looking for a weak spot, soft spot. He apparently found one, and that's where the war took another advance up that road that we were trying to clear of mines.